Hey guys, welcome back to We're Talking Movies. This is Cade, joined by Andrew. Happy
Happy
Halloween.
Halloween.
Thanks so much for joining us. Today we are going to be reviewing John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. Andrew, why don't you start us off with our pros for the movie?
All right. Well, let's start off with, in my opinion, one of the biggest pros of this movie. Let's talk about the music. Now, the main theme of the Halloween movies, or in this case, the first Halloween movie, is iconic. It's one of the most well recognized horror movie themes of all time. I would argue even one of the most iconic film scores of all time, period. Much like how the Jaws theme worked because it was so simple. This is actually pretty similar. When you really listen to it, it's really only like two different piano trills kind of layered over each other with maybe a couple of accompanying strings, but not really that much else. So the fact that it's this very simple, like eerie sort of it gives off this vibe of impending doom, but not in the as much of a punch in the face way as say like the Jaws theme is. But outside of the main theme, you also have some very dark booming music with heavy strings and percussion, which also really does help sell the scares in this movie.
Yeah, John Carpenter's score is definitely a highlight. John Carpenter is a very talented filmmaker. Aside from being a director, he's also a writer, a producer, and a composer. And, he's had a lot of great scores, but I do think that this is probably his best one. He's obviously a master at building suspense, which not only comes from his direction, but also from his work as a composer. The score does such a great job building suspense. And in my opinion, it also has a very mysterious essence to it, which I think works really well with a character like Michael Myers.
I completely agree on that one. Another pro I need to bring up is the sound design. One detail about this movie that I only just noticed when I did my rewatch for this review is I love the recurring use of harsh sound stings to emphasize certain moments, in particularly certain scary moments, whether it's glass breaking, ultra sharp piano notes. It really does help sell the scares. It's a really clever idea, and I really, really like it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a pro for me would definitely have to be just the opening sequence. The opening sequence of this movie is incredibly well done. I love how we follow it through Michael's perspective because it does such a great job hiding Michael's identity as this 6-year-old kid. It's always a fascinating idea to follow the perspective of the antagonist. Also, apart from how well shot the opening is, I love how it's told as one continuous long take. I always appreciate things like that in movies, and I especially liked it in this movie because it was a great way to get us hooked in it from the start. Another pro that I have with the movie is just the character of Michael Myers. He's without a doubt one of the most iconic slashers and horror icons ever created. Now, what makes Michael Myers scary? Well, I think it's a couple of different things. He has a very intimidating on-screen presence, accompanied by the fact that he's always silent. With all that, I think the most crucial aspect of what makes Michael scary is the fact that he's such a complete mystery to us.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, the only real details about his backstory that we get from Loomis is that it's the night he came home. That's all he gives us. We don't get any motivation as to why he keeps stalking Lori and her friends, apart from the fact that he just kind of saw her outside of his house. And another aspect that I think makes Michael so scary is he is 100% human, at least in this iteration. We won't talk about the Cult of the Thorn BS until much later down the road, but he's completely human. And yet he's almost like this unkillable Terminator almost. Think about it. He gets stabbed. He gets stabbed in the eye. He gets stabbed in the neck, in the stomach. He gets shot, but he just keeps coming back and getting back up. Again, the two things always come to mind for me is the head tilt after Michael pins Bob to the kitchen wall, and the silent, almost like Dracula-esque sit up at the end of the movie. When Laurie thinks she's killed him.
Yeah, and I think regarding the fact that Michael doesn't have a clear backstory in this movie, I think that's a good thing. Obviously, that was one of our bigger complaints with the Halloween remake from 2007, the fact that they gave him more of a backstory. And the thing is, the reason why I think it's a good thing not to have a clear origin in this movie is because sometimes not having all the answers is a good thing. It's because sometimes the unknown is scarier.
Yeah, that's part of when we reviewed Trick or Treat. That's one of the things we loved about Sam so much is that they don't reveal anything about his backstory. And this Michael has the very similar effect.
Yeah, for sure. And the mask is iconic. Actually, I always find it kind of hilarious how originally it was a William Shatner mask that they spray painted white and cut out the eye holes and kind of messed with the hair a little bit.
Yeah, that will never not be funny. But I think the cutting out of the eye is just leaving it as these just this dead, empty sockets. I think is like what really sells the mask as this like face of death.
Yeah, agreed. And another pro with this movie is definitely John Carpenter's direction. John Carpenter did a hell of a job directing this movie. Now, on paper, this might seem like a pretty simple little horror film. And I think the reason why Carpenter pulled it off so well and made it something so unique is because you can really tell that he had a clear vision for what he wanted this movie to be and what the concept was. And he knew how to build tension, he knew how to write the characters, and he knew how to get good performances out of his actors. He also knew how to make Michael a very frightening and mysterious figure.
Yeah, he really did. Nobody but John Carpenter could make this movie.
Well, and also, John Carpenter has also made some other very iconic films like The Thing, Escape from New York, Christine, The Fog, and many more. And here's a challenging question. Would you argue that this is his best movie as a director?
That's a toss up between this and The Thing, and I could definitely see it going either way. There's definitely an argument to be made either way, but it's too close to call, in my opinion. Talking about some other characters in this movie, let's talk about Dr. Loomis. I love how Donald Pleasance portrays Loomis, presents him as this very intelligent and well-educated individual when it comes to the topic of Michael Myers, because obviously he's been his doctor for so long. But he also gives him this edge of somebody who is genuinely scared of Michael as well, because he's seen just how like dangerous and dead-eyed he really is. And I think that's actually a nice touch. Like he's not, yes, he knows Michael, he understands Michael, but he also understands that Michael really can't be controlled and is just this almost unstoppable killing machine who needs to be stopped by any means necessary.
Yeah, and although Dr. Loomis and Michael don't really have any scenes together before the climax of the movie, you can really buy the relationship between these two characters. And I think a big part of that is because of how good Donald Pleasance is in the role. He does such a good job making Loomis seem so terrified of what Michael will do now that he's out. And you can really see that in the scene where he's talking with Sheriff Brackett, telling us how Michael's basically just evil incarnate. He's just devoid of humanity. So I think that the casting of Dr. Loomis was definitely a crucial part of the movie's success because you really needed to buy into the idea that he and Michael both had this type of dynamic with each other.
Yeah.
Another pro with the movie in terms of the characters is definitely the character of Laurie Strode. She's often ranked as one of the best final girls in horror movies, alongside characters like Sidney Prescott, Nancy Thompson, even Ellen Ripley. And I totally agree. I think a big part of what I enjoy about Laurie is that you can tell that she is scared of Michael, especially after she sees what he's done to all her friends. Despite that, she's still willing and able to fight back and hold her own against him.
Yeah. And what I really like is that Lori is 100% just a normal girl. She hangs out with her friends. She babysits kids. She's 100% just this normal, everyday American girl who's suddenly thrust into this extremely dangerous and stressful situation. And Jamie Lee Curtis did a phenomenal job portraying that. There's a reason why this is, I would argue, the best final girl in horror movie history, if not top 2 or 3 easily.
Yeah, I agree. Regarding some of the other characters, you also have some of Laurie's friends, specifically Annie and Linda. So, what I like about these characters is how different they are from Laurie. And I think from each other to an extent. While Laurie is presented as the more quiet and shy member of this group, Linda, I think, comes off more as this troublemaker, while Annie is portrayed more as the sarcastic member of the group. I really like that. I like how all the characters are different from each other. Sometimes in horror movies, specifically slasher films, a lot of the characters kind of feel like they have the same personalities, and it's kind of hard to differentiate them sometimes. But that's not the case with this movie, and I credit both John Carpenter and Deborah Hill from a writing perspective.
Yeah, no, they all do really come across as friends. Yes, they kind of jaw at each other, but you can still definitely tell it comes from a place of love, not from a place of malice. So when Laurie's friends do end up getting killed off, you do feel bad for them, especially because they both get it in pretty brutal ways, let's be honest. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, they're not just cardboard cutouts of characters that we want to see get killed, which was one of our biggest complaints with the original Friday the 13th when we reviewed that. Before we move on from the characters, I love, even though he's not on screen for a whole lot, I love Sheriff Brackett in this movie because he's not the stereotypical horror movie cop that just doesn't listen to anybody saying, oh, there's no danger around here. Yeah, he doesn't 100% believe Loomis, but he's still willing to listen to him and give him the benefit of the doubt. And while he doesn't end up saving the day in this movie, he does at least mitigate the damage a little bit. And obviously, he plays a bit of a bigger role in Halloween 2, which obviously picks up right after how this one ends. I don't know, just a pretty solid horror movie cop character. I would would say up there with one of the best, along with like say Martin Brody or Sheriff Garris from Friday the 13th Part 6. Yeah, just a really solid cop character, and it's nice to see, an archetype that's not a complete buffoon.
And I think it's also nice that both he and Dr. Loomis had this great dynamic with each other too.
Yeah, again, he doesn't 100% believe Loomis, but he's more than willing to give him the benefit of the doubt and doesn't just kind of shoo him off like, oh, nothing bad ever happens here. All right, so now let's move away from the characters for a minute. Let's talk about the kills in this movie. There is some great, and I know I use this term way too much, but instantly iconic kills in this classic. Let's talk about Bob being pinned to the wall with the kitchen knife, and then that head tilt from Michael that really just sells it. You got Annie being slowly strangled in the car from behind, with the only sound being when she hits the car horn occasionally. You got Linda being choked to death with the phone cord while Laurie's on the other end of the phone. The kills in this movie are great, with the only exception being that weird random truck driver that gets killed off screen and we only see sort of half in shot. No, just some great kills in this movie. Again, and I think another thing that kind of sold this movie as the classic that it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. But now that we've covered all our pros, why don't we move on to the few cons that we have with this movie? You want to start?
Yeah, I got two, and weirdly enough, they're both questions. Number one, how did Michael learn how to drive exactly if he's been institutionalized for 15 years and he was taken into the institution when he was 6 years old? Driving is not exactly the easiest thing in the world to just pick up and do. So
Yeah, I think that that's always been one of my issues with the movie, how Michael learned how to drive. But also, another thing is, I think that he spends a little too much time in the movie driving around in the car following Laurie. I think that that could have just been cut down a little bit more. And it doesn't necessarily ruin the pacing of the movie. It just gets kind of draggy at times where he's just always following her around in the car for this long. So that's maybe one con that I have with the movie.
yeah, I can definitely see where you're coming from. I honestly didn't think that as a con, but now that you put it like that, yeah, it does feel a little too many times where they do that bit.
Yeah, and I think if I had maybe one other con, and this is really just a nitpick, but when Laurie discovers all the bodies of her friends, when Michael pops out from behind her when he's hiding in the shadows, he then misses, which, okay, fine. I just find it a little bit hard to believe since he was so close to her from behind. But then later, when she runs back to find Tommy and Lindsay, Michael's also in the house and he attacks her from behind the couch and he misses again? Really?
Yeah, I could see where you're coming from, but I definitely agree that is a little nitpicky. My only other con is, I think, maybe a little less nitpicky, which is, and this is one that we're not the first ones to bring up. The scene where Laurie sees Michael standing outside of her house. How could Michael physically disappear from her sight while she is looking directly at him and she never looks away? So how does he just disappear between takes? Can he teleport? I know a lot of people bring that up, and also the scene where Laurie first sees Michael when she's walking home with her friends. But that one I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because, he could have very easily, say, jumped into one of the hedges or behind a bush. This one, there is no way where he could disappear without Laurie seeing where he went because she never breaks her view at him. It's not like she looks away for a second and then he disappears. She never changes what she's looking at. So that is a big con for me because that's a pretty glaring mistake. Does it affect my love of this movie? Hell no. But it is still a little painfully obvious.
Yeah, it is. But to close this off, what would you give this movie on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, this is the original Halloween. This is an absolute classic. This is a franchise that's become very big to our channel because we've covered quite a few of these, and I'm kind of surprised it took us this long to get to the OG. But this still holds up. I got to give this a 9.5. Yes, I have a couple of problems with it, but there's just so much about this movie I love so much. It's the reason why it's as universally beloved as it is.
Yeah, it's without a doubt a classic. Not one of my favorite horror movies of all time, but definitely up there. It might actually make my top 10, maybe. Yeah, I do have some nitpicks with it, but overall, it's still a very great movie. And I think I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's that great of a film. It's that iconic. And yeah, I'll have to give it a 9. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And
Happy Halloween.